r/AskReddit. What's the scariest thing that happened to you when in someone else's house? I was house sitting for an older neighbor who had gone off to visit her grandkids a few states over. I didn't have a place to stay anymore, as the term for the place I was living at was over, and since I'm going off to college soon I didn't want to renew it, so I agreed to do it, since she would be gone long enough that I could stay there until I moved in with my grandmother. So I'm sleeping on the couch and I hear panicked voices coming from the back of the house. I was already pretty on edge, since I lived in a bad neighborhood and this was basically prime time for petty thieves. So I slip off the couch and start sneaking towards the back of the house and I make it to the kitchen. All the rental properties are laid out the same. You walk in the front door and you're in the living room with the attached kitchen, which was separated by kitchen counter. Off to the side you go into the hallway and you have 2 bedrooms on either side with a bathroom/laundry room at the end of the hallway. So I grabbed a knife out of the holder on the counter and start creeping towards the hallway and I could hear one of the people freaking out. I could barely make it out since they were in one of the bedrooms, but it sounded like they were holding back sobs. So I flung open the door and flipped on the light. There were 2 kids in the room, middle school kids who went to the school across the street. Turns out they were in the process of robbing the place when I showed up, and they didn't want to go to jail. They thought that they'd be able to sneak away when I went to the bathroom or something, but chickened out because they didn't want to risk getting caught. They sat in that room for hours until nightfall so they could sneak out. It made me kinda sad though. They were kids, and their life is going to be a lot more difficult now just because they wanted to be thugs. I have 2. First, when I was a kid I had a neighbor named Zed who was also my best friend. I'd spend the night at his house often and saw a lot of things young me didn't realize at the time was very messed up. His parents were drunks and smoked pot. Both were pretty functional. Mom cooked and cleaned, father worked, but it was very clear the couple valued their smoke and drink over their son. Zed had an uncle, mom's side, who showed up one day fresh out of prison and started staying with them. Uncle was a nasty drunk, often got violent with Zed's dad, and acted like he was the head of the household. One time while staying over, Zed and I fell asleep on the sofas watching TV. Uncle came in, and unbeknownst to sleeping me woke Zed up and became confrontational. I should mention Zed and I are about 8 at the time. I was startled awake by yelling, and opened my eyes to Uncle shoving, choking, and lifting Zed up by the neck, and slamming him onto the wood flood so hard I felt it from the couch. Zed's mom and dad rushed out to help, and his mom called the police and Uncle was taken away. I still relive the sound and feel of Zed's body hitting the wood floor. It was just awful. Second, in high school I made a seeming normal friend named Jay. She was a little edgy, but who wasn't as a teenager, so I didn't find anything off about her at face value. We hung out at school for a while, then she asked me over for a weekend sleepover. I said sure, why not, and happily went. It is still one of my biggest regrets to date. Jay, for lack of a better word, was and likely still is a psycho. She showed me what she likes to do for fun. Trade pictures of random naked women with random guys in chat rooms, like trading cards or some shit. Also she broke into her mom's liquor cabinet to drink wine. When her mom got home and saw what she'd done, Jay threw a giant glass vase into her closet so it shattered, and then proceeded to walk inside and cut herself on the shards, while I sat on the edge of her bed freaked out but also too scared to say a word because she wasn't upset or crying. She was furious and didn't say a single word the entire time while she cut her arms with shards of glass. Thankfully her mom said she was sending me home as punishment. I'd never been so happy to get out of a situation in my life. When I was 12, around 2006 to 7, I'd often stay the weekend at my friend's house in a really rural area. I'm talking in the mountains with houses separated by half a mile of road and woods and maybe one street light every mile. Very dark and creepy at night. His dad, Marine veteran, liked to hunt, real in a woods type of guy, had a school bus set up deep in the woods. Every seat had been taken out except for the drivers in the front 4. Behind those was 2 couches, a toilet, a TV, a water tank, a bed, a bookshelf and a suitcase full of MREs. He'd often go on weekend-long camping trips in this bad boy. As a kid this was an absolute prime hangout location. We'd spent months exploring the woods. However, this particular time of the year there were a lot of mountain lions in the area and we'd been warned against going too far in the woods. Well, that night my friend had several people over, including myself and a few kids that lived nearby that were both older than us by a few years. We had all kinds of snacks, our Gamma Boy SPs with Pokemon, our UGR cards, and one of those old bulky portable DVD players. Really set up for a night of debauchery. Well, around 10 PM we start to notice some strange occurrences. We'd occasionally hear some twigs snapping nearby. At first one of the older kids noticed and was very freaked out by it, but the rest of us just played it off as some small critters running about. Then the twig snaps started getting closer. One by one each of us began to get more and more scared. Talk started about what we'd do if a mountain lion roamed up to the bus. All we had was a walkie-talkie to communicate back to the parents, and it would take a solid 10 to 15 minutes to make it to or from the house. After a while the twigs stopped snapping and the tension slowly subsided. We went back to battling our Pokemon teams while eating Lays and having a jolly time laughing and cutting up. All memory of our previous fears had been forgotten. At which point, the bus starts shaking. At first it was barely noticeable. The most paranoid of us were the first to point it out, and quickly we all fell into the same paranoia. Every couple minutes the bus would shake slightly. We opened a window slightly. No wind. Closed the window again. We shined our flashlights out but could see nothing. We began to discuss our fate. Then the shaking started to get much more noticeable and could no longer be written off as all in our heads. At this point there was no discussion, except small utterances of abject horror and stifled whimpering. The shaking stopped. Quick glances to each other to confirm we'd all noticed. Suddenly, slow scraping along the back of the bus. There was no holding back and trying to act tough in front of each other. We all started screaming. The largest and oldest of us hid himself under a blanket, likely crying and saying his final prayers. Shortly after, we hear a low, deep growl at the end of the bus. At this point we are all in hysterics, absolutely losing our mind in fear. We radio our friend's dad. His mom answers, and we are collectively losing our shit, screaming at her to get his dad to grab a gun and come save us. She begins freaking out, saying he's in the shower and that she'll get him out and he'll be there in 10 minutes. The shaking and noises stop, only for a few minutes. However, this time we stay on edge. One of us suggests opening a window to see if the coast is clear. The bravest of us reluctantly opens the window and immediately a huge mass slams against the window. We all begin shrieking in terror. The door to the bus starts violently shaking. We're all in tears and scream into the radio for his dad to hurry because we're about to be attacked. No response. The bus doors fling open. We all scream, jump and scramble, hurdling objects to get to the back of the bus. And then laughter. Hysterical laughter. We all look back to the front of the bus, shaking from pure adrenaline, to see our friend's dad doubled over in tears from laughing so hard. He laughed for a solid minute before standing up. "Man, I got you all good, bastard." When I was in high school I was house sitting for the first time at my best friend's place. He had 2 dogs. It was a split level home, so I was in the downstairs with surround sound watching Event Horizon for the very first time. At some point mid-movie all of the power in the house goes off, and I'm in pitch blackness and confusion for about 5 seconds until the power comes back on and the doorbell rings. The dogs start going nuts and barking at the door. I'm at this point freaking out. I run straight upstairs to my friend's room and grab the BB gun I know is next to his dresser. I start inching back downstairs towards the door with the squirrel popper tightly in hand. I turn on the porch light but no one is out there. The dogs are still riled up though. At this point I can see outside that it's raining. Hadn't heard the storm before because of the loud movie, followed by my pounding heart. I call my mum and ask her casually if the power went out at our house due to the storm. We lived about 5 minutes from my friend. She said no, but a funny thing happened. The phone line suddenly went dead. Now I'm starting to freak out a little bit because the power is still on, but the phone is dead. This is when cell phones were just starting to become normalized, but most people still used pagers. After about a minute or so, I'm trying to rationalize everything when the power goes back out. About 5 seconds pass, the power comes back on and doorbell rings. The dogs start going nuts again. I had left the porch light on but didn't see anyone out there. So I herded the dogs back downstairs, locked the door, clutched the BB gun to my chest, and finished watching Event Horizon. TLDR, watched Event Horizon while house sitting. Freaky stuff happened with power outages. I grabbed a BB gun and finished the movie like a man. Movie still freaks me out. I was on a night out drinking with a girlfriend of mine. She said I could crash at hers that night. Some dancing and a few drinks later, and she'd met some guy at the bar that she seemed pretty taken with. He invited her back to his, and she was playing all coy while secretly slipping me her house keys, telling me to let myself in and crash there as promised. I stayed out drinking with friends, and she left with a guy. Hours later, must be around 2 AM, I hitch a bus back to her house and stumble through the front door. I could see the living room light was on, which was odd as my friend lived alone and I hadn't remembered us leaving it on. I walked into the room, chucked my handbag on the sofa, switched the light off, and made my way upstairs. I swung the bedroom door open and threw myself into the bed, didn't bother turning the light on, and was too drunk to bother removing clothes. I must have passed out pretty quickly. I woke up about an hour later because of a noise. I wasn't sure what the noise was, but I sleepily turned my head in the direction I thought it had come from. The wall along the side of the bed featured fitted wardrobes with those sliding mirrored doors, so I could see myself, the bed and the floor. I fell back to sleep and woke up again because of a loud noise. I remember the bedroom clock saying it was about 3:30 am. I turned my head again to look at the wardrobes, and this time I could see a glimmer of light in its reflection coming from under the bed. Without moving, I peered closed at the glimmer, and, in the darkness, I slowly made out two eyes blinking wildly and some white teeth smiling back at me. Someone was under the bed and must have been there this whole time. I felt this cold panic wash over me, as if I were paralyzed, and I wasn't sure what to do. In what felt like hours passing, obviously just a few seconds, I calculated that my handbag was in the living room and thought out the route to the front door. I counted down from 3 and then, quick as a flash, I bolted out of bed, down the stairs, grabbed my bag out of the living room, and hauled ass down the street as fast as I could. I called the police once I felt I'd run so far that my legs were going to fall off. When they arrived at the house, the guy was still under the bed. If I had gone in the kitchen, when I arrived at the house I would have found the back door's window smash in with the door hanging open. The guy was apparently completely harmless. He'd walked out of this private ward a mile or so away, which housed people with mental illnesses and severe learning difficulties. He had a childlike personality and always wanted to play, so to him, it was just a fun game. But yeah, woof. Finally I have an opportunity to tell this story. Years ago when I was 20-ish, I was dating a guy who had very wealthy friends. Like billionaire wealthy, we were definitely not wealthy. Boyfriend and I were traveling to a vacation spot in Maine and had stopped to spend the night in the home of the grandmother of my BF's wealthy friend. The friend was going to travel on with us the next day. The grandmother's house was an enormous mansion, probably the biggest home I've ever been inside. I was pretty intimidated by it all, and I went to bed in my own room early. In the middle of the night, I woke up super alert, for some reason. The house was silent and pitch black, but I found myself getting out of bed and wandering around the house. Now this is something totally outside my character. I'm a respectful house guest and would never go exploring or snoop in the dark in someone's home, especially the elderly owner of a huge mansion. I didn't even know why I was doing it. It was just this compulsion. Soon I descended the stairway to the ground floor and continued my wandering. After 10 minutes I started to hear a small noise, almost like a cat or a baby crying. Still in the dark, I made my way toward the sound, and I found our friend's elderly grandmother on the floor, weakly calling for help. She'd gone to the bathroom in the middle of the night and fallen. Of course I raced to get my BF, and we helped her back to bed. She was very grateful, family thanked me, etc. The next morning over breakfast one of the family suddenly asked me how I'd found her. What was I doing up at that hour? The house was so huge I couldn't possibly have heard her weak cries until I was in her room. I suddenly realized I had no idea why I woke up so suddenly in a strange house and started wandering around. I still have no explanation about it to this day. I was 7. I went to my friend's house for the third time ever. It was notable because just getting to go over to his house was always a hassle. I always figured it was just because they were embarrassed because they were less well off than most. Well anyways, the one unifying factor of all my visits was that his father was passed out on his recliner and we weren't supposed to go into the garage. Well this time, however, my friend felt like being a cool guy and going into the garage anyways, since his mom was away and his dad seemed to be out like a rock. I didn't notice it at first, but after a few minutes of fucking around we turned around to go back inside, and I noticed the biggest Nazi flag on the back wall of the garage with a bunch of other Nazi imagery, SS, 14/88 etc. I had until that moment never been more scared in my life. But I kept my mouth shut until we got back to my friend's room. Once we got back I immediately started asking questions. I can't remember everything I asked now, as I was speaking a mile a minute. And I won't go into details of my friend's replies, but turns out his father is not a good dude. I wouldn't learn the terms neo-Nazi and domestic abuse until several years later, but I knew it was very wrong. I wasn't done questioning my friend when we heard his father moving in the living room, then the garage door opening, and after a few minutes it slamming shut and loud stomping coming towards his room. I remember him saying, "You should get out of here." I didn't think twice. I ran out the door and saw the most purely enraged human I have ever seen. That became the new scariest moment of my life. I was genuinely afraid for my life, but he was between me and the door. I ran directly at him and slid between his legs and ran for the front door. I imagine it must have looked really cool in retrospect, but at the moment I was just happy to be outside. As I came outside, his mother and my own were just arriving. I remember telling his mother she needed to save her son, and then as soon as she was headed towards the door telling my mom I wanted to leave right then. Sorry this went a little long, but it's just etched in my memory forever. Until that day I thought Nazis were a thing of the past, an evil we defeated in a long ago time. And my best friend was 15. I was sleeping over on the day before Christmas. His family lived in an upper class neighborhood. Anyways, his room was up on the second floor and we were still up around midnight fucking shit up in the TV room to the point where his dad yells, "Y'all better get the fuck in bed or I'm gonna come up there and kick y'all's ass and shut us up real quick." Fast forwards to around 2:30 AM and I hear this loud, and I mean loud, banging on some wall followed by his dad yelling, "Get the fuck back or I'm gonna shoot," and then more banging. His dad yells for my friend to wake up and call the police ASAP, so here I'm with my friend all groggy not realizing what's happening, and the next thing we hear is the most terrifying scream I've ever heard in my life. Like some woman was crying bloody murder. My stomach dropped immediately and I realized some shit was going down like right now. His dad had ran to his bedroom and returned to the front door with his gun and exits the house to run to the neighbor's house where we think this intruder had gone. My friend is on the phone trying to explain the situation to the police, but all this information I'm telling you now is what we found out after, so he was confused on what to say, just that the police needed to come as we heard a woman screaming. Police arrive in less than 5 minutes and arrive to what is his dad pointing his gun at this two grown ass muscular men wrestling in the ground yelling, "You better subdue him right now and take over from there." An ambulance comes and the neighbors are all outside trying to see what's going on, and the police come up to us and tell us that the man was on drugs and he was the one screaming because he thought he was dying. We talked to the neighbor, one of the muscular dudes, and he told me and my friend that they were trying that synthetic marijuana Raka spice that had been circling around, and his friend freaked the fuck out, hopped the fence, ran away, got lost, came back and went to the wrong house and started banging on the front door rack of my friend's house. When he realized it was the wrong house and heard the word gun, it sent him on a rampage and he thought he was dead and started screaming at the top of his lungs. His friend had to tackle him to the ground because he didn't want him to attack anyone. Dumbass almost actually got shot that night because my friend's dad thought he was some kind of intruder / killed someone next door. My friend and I were shook up for a bit as we were just kids. Saw his face and he had some of the biggest craziest eyes I've ever seen. TL. Doctor slept over a friend's house the night before Christmas and his dad almost shot some guy on drugs trying to break into the house. Moral of the story: don't do drugs, and if you do any drugs I recommend the mellow kind, like weed, real weed. The kind that makes you kill a bag of chips. When I was younger, my family always would go eat Mexican food with this other family, a husband, wife, and their 2 sons, one older, 18 during the story, and one younger, 14 for the story. We were good friends with, and then we would go to either of our houses afterwards, and the parents would play dominoes and hang out. It became our weekly routine, and it was awesome. The people were practically blood relatives to us. Time goes on, and on one of those nights, when I was about 13 I think, and while the adults were clacking away some dominoes, I went off to the brothers' shared room. They were watching a movie and they started shoving each other a little bit. I was too oblivious to know that there was any legitimate conflict, so I thought it was funny. Quickly they began trying to pin each other down on the bed, and the older brother was beginning to really hurt the younger. I didn't notice. I still thought it was just horseplay. I scurried off back to the dining room to see what the parents were doing. The younger brother cried out and came into the dining room and began to complain about his brother to his parents. They called the older brother to come to them. He came out all huffy and puffy and pussy. He began to open the front door and his dad asked him, "Where the hell do you think you're going?" To which he responded, "Wherever the hell I want, old man." The dad got up in his face and asked, "Come again?" And the brother bowed up, Texan word for puffing out your chest, to his dad. At that point, the tension drew out an utter deathly silence in the whole house. The brother shouted at his dad to get out of his face and shoved him back. The dad pinned him against the wall to reassert his authority, which only led to the son taking a successful swing at his face. Immediately after came a scream from the wife and a frenzied fight between the two, where they made their way into the living room while they were beating the shit out of each other. The son tripped, and the dad grabbed him by his neck, or collar of his shirt, I can't remember, and began slamming him on the ground, while his son was making a sound of a. The whole scene was so surreal to me and my family, because it came out of nowhere, and the wife, with tears in her now blood red eyes, apologized up and down to us, and led us to the front door to leave. I don't think I've ever had a quieter ride in a car since we went home that night. I convinced my friend, I'll call her S, to throw a birthday party for herself at her house. Everything was going so great. We all invited our own groups of friends, so there were all kinds of interesting people in and out having a great time. Well, early on in the night, a guy that one of S's friends had brought got way too drunk and was making all of the women at the party super uncomfortable, walking up to them all and saying really weird inappropriate stuff. A bunch of us girls got together in the backyard and talked about it. Turns out literally every girl had been approached and skeeved out by him. So S and I told the guy, "Hey man, you gotta go. You can't be doing that. Have a great night." He gets super angry and storms off down the street, leaving his car. We think he'll come back when he's sober and pick it up tomorrow morning. No biggie. Flash forward about an hour and I hear screaming from the front living room. We all run to see what's up, and the dude is back, and he has the girl he came with by the hair in the front yard. He's screaming at her and yanking her around. All the men run out and start to yell at the guy and get the girl away. I get her inside and have her lock herself in the bathroom in case he gets in the house. This guy not only pulls a knife in the mess of people and make a few stabs, but also punches my friend S in her mouth. Everyone let loose on him. He got his ass beat up and down the street. The scary part is, when we thought he had left again, he actually had gotten into his car, and while a huge group of us were in the front yard checking everyone and making sure they were okay, not stabbed etc, he floored it through the yard, missing us by feet, flipped around, and did that 4 or 5 more times, getting closer until he was just driving directly at people. We were diving left and right trying not to get hit. A couple people got dinged by his mirrors. One guy smashed his arm pretty bad. No major injuries though, thank God. The cops showed up and barricaded the entire street and at gunpoint dragged him out of his car and ordered us all back into the house. He went to jail and S immediately had his car towed. Surprisingly, we ended up continuing the party. A lot of us needed a drink after that. The girl in the bathroom went home safe and S had one hell of a story to tell. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe the channel.